that working? It's recording, I think. Did it say recording in progress? Okay, cool. Cool. I'm gonna have to do a, you see me in the thing. Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the presentation on navigating your academic accommodations with the SSD. My name is Marissa. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the Education and Administration Coordinator here at the SSD. Uh-oh, what does this say? What? Captions. Oh, okay, let me put captions on. That's smart. I forgot. Captions. Show captions. There we go. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, my name is Marissa. I'm the Education Coordinator at the SSD, doing a presentation on academic accommodations. Have folks heard of academic accommodations before? We got thumbs ups? Fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna try and click this. Nope. Okay. Nope. There we go. Oh, go back. There we go. Okay. Territorial acknowledgement. Just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the unceded, unsurrendered, stolen territories of the Lekwungen speaking people. And the university was built on a Lekwungen village. And we are here as beneficiaries of that, which is kind of super messed up. But here we are. And I encourage folks to think about the space that they are occupying in your daily life and the space that you are occupying right now. So, quick intro. As I mentioned, I am the Education and Administration Coordinator. I'm also a disabled graduate student. I'm doing my master's in educational psychology and big fan of maps, big fan of cats, and big fan of Phineas and Ferb. I should have included a photo of a really great photo of me from grade 10 of fully decked out in Perry the Platypus attire, and it's a really good one. So the SSD versus the Cal. We serve the same population of students, but we are two separate entities. The SSD is an advocacy group through the UVSS, and membership requires self-identification, whereas the Cal is part of UVIC, and requires documentation. Oh no. Hello? Okay, there we go. So this is a statement on our website that we have. The SSD aims to support students who self-identify as having one or more disabilities. In particular, we support students to reduce barriers in the social, emotional, and education domains of student life. So we specifically work with students for the purpose of advocacy and inclusion, whereas the Cal specifically works with students for academic accommodations. So this is a statement from their website, works with faculty and students to promote educational accessibility for students with disabilities and chronic health conditions. And yeah, basically their mandate is accommodations. Our mandate is everything that is not accommodations. So those are the differences between those two. Cal has various services on top of accommodations. They have learning assistance programs. Anyone ever heard of that? Grace, yes. I have a couple nods. So that does learning strategy sessions, as well as tutoring sessions, and those may have a fee involved depending if you are on student loans and have grants or not. They also have alternative text formats and full service note taking. So full service note takers are hired note takers that will go to your class with you, or they will sit in your class and take notes and send them to you. There's also peer note taking, which is volunteer. They do interpretation and transcribing, adaptive technology, as I said, academic accommodations. And these three here, LAP, note-taking, and interpretation might have a fee associated with them, depending on the grants that you qualify for and whatnot. There's sometimes fees associated with those. Here are some examples of various accommodations that students may be able to get. After chatting with Cal, this is not like a laundry list of things that everyone gets, but it's like things that you might get, depending on your documentation. There's kind of 3 categories. I'll start with classroom over here. So a common one is attendance accommodations. So some of them may say that you may arrive late to class. You don't have to attend class if you don't want to. Well, not if you don't want to. You don't have to attend class, like you may miss classes because of your disability. You may have note takers in class, that's an accommodation, or also audio record the class. You're welcome. Some folks might not, some instructors might not enjoy their classes being recorded, but some accommodations allow that to happen. There is one permission to leave class and return when needed, and then also computer or technology use in classes. I think this is probably a little bit less common these days, but some profs are super stringent on not allowing laptops in classrooms. So there is an accommodation for that. Exams, probably one of the most common one is extra time on exams and tests. And also we're writing in a distraction reduced room. So either in the test center in the Cal or in another room. Supervised breaks during exams, ability to write exams on computer. So that's like word processing, like in Word, or take the actual like multiple choice test on a computer. Calculator use and scrap paper. And then in like the other accommodations, reduced course load, everyone automatically qualifies for that if you're with Cal, I believe. So for undergraduate students, that is 2 classes a semester instead of 4, and for graduate students is 1 class a semester instead of 2. Assignment deadline flexibility, so that's like extensions on assignments and temporary absences from class. So you might be wondering, do I qualify for accommodations? Here, this is a list specifically from the Cal website of disabilities that qualify you. So learning disability, ADHD, ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, any mental health diagnosis, so depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, OCD, PTSD, all that kind of stuff counts as a qualifying disability. Long-term reoccurring physical or sensory disability, so that could be like blindness, deafness, spinal cord injuries, that kind of stuff. Those all count, as well as like a chronic health condition. So like chronic migraines, for example, would probably count. Non-qualifying disabilities, temporary disabilities. So this is one that we see a lot at the SSD, people coming in. We had someone come in relatively recently saying that they broke their dominant arm and they needed accommodations because they couldn't take notes in class, but the Cal doesn't actually service that, which is unfortunate, but that is the reality of it. Also a disability, so any of these disabilities here that is not diagnosed by a recognized professional, and I'll get into who a recognized professional is in a minute. But if you have a diagnosis from a counselor, for example, that will not count. So you may qualify, but you may not have the right documentation. In that case, it doesn't count. So here's how you can register for accommodations. The first thing to do is gather the required documentation from a medical professional. In the next slide, I will tell you what in the world that means and how you do that. There is a pre-intake form on the Cal website. For this semester, it needs to be submitted by February 28th. So that is just like a registration of your diagnosis, your name, your V number. I'm not sure what entirely else it has. It's mostly just like an intake of, do you qualify for accommodations? And then after they go through that, then they will move forward with you to an intake appointment with a Cal advisor. So you will be assigned an advisor that creates an accommodation plan with you. And sometimes if the advisors are very, very busy and overwhelmed, which they often are, you may qualify for digital registration. So that is after a pre-intake form is submitted and approved, you can get, before you have the intake appointment with the Cal advisor, you may be able to get temporary accommodations for 1 semester. So it expires at the end of the term, but sometimes just with scheduling and whatnot, it's not possible to get a meeting with an advisor set up before the deadline and whatnot. So that can happen, and that does happen. So that can, and then you will have to see a Cal advisor if you want permanent accommodations. So what do I mean by a recognized professional? So these are what they say are recognized professionals. Oh, hello. Oh, okay. So so I guess it kind of breaks it down. This is directly off the Cal website. It breaks it down by types of disabilities. So physical or mobility has to be a physician, lots of different other ones. An important one that's specifically for mental health diagnoses, a registered clinical counselor doesn't count, only registered clinical psychologists count. So I know clinical counselors are often more accessible to get appointments with, or they might be less expensive to have appointments with. However, they cannot diagnose and they cannot provide documentation for Cal. So basically a physician or a specialist in the area of your disability. Oh, wrong way. The documentation has to include things such as the assessment date, and talks about your impact on education, recommendations for specific accommodations, though take that one with a grain of salt, because despite that being on there, Cal advisors have full discretion on how they implement accommodation plans. So even if a specialist says this student needs to have, 2 times the amount on exams and tests, the Cal advisor does not have to do that. So take that one with a grain of salt. It might be helpful for a medical professional to put that on there, but the advisor doesn't actually have to do that. And then in terms of learning disabilities, that one's a little more complicated. There's like a whole slew of things you need to do. The most important things to remember is if you have a learning disability, your diagnosis needs to be from when you were an adult, not from when you were a child. So even if you get it when you're 17, you have to get a new assessment, which can be very inaccessible. And it has to go through all of these things. In terms of other documentation, so documentation for mental health, spinal cord injuries, deaf, blind, that kind of stuff, that all needs to be within 3 years. So the documentation needs to be relatively recent for learning disabilities. It needs to be as an adult. So with that, there are a good amount of barriers to access that students may face when trying to register with Cal. There is quite a high turnover of Cal advisors. The Cal gets more and more and more students registered every term. And with that, the Cal advisors get more and more and more students on their plate of accommodations. I talked to an advisor the other day, and they told me that they're a part-time advisor. And even with part-time, they have 450 students under them, which is a lot of students. So I would imagine full-time advisors have probably around 800 or so. That's a lot of people to manage accommodation plans for, especially if they are trying to update their plans or, have intake meetings and whatnot. Some instructors may be uneducated or reluctant to help with accommodations. They may not want to give extensions. They may not, they may not book the tests with the Cal in time, that kind of stuff. As I mentioned, the financial costs of formal documentation, so especially for learning disability and autism diagnosis, those are not covered by BC MSP after you are an adult. So those are fully out of pocket unless you have some extended health benefits that cover it. So that can be really costly and a big barrier to folks for getting the accommodations that they need, which is in the same of access to formal diagnoses. Sometimes it's just hard to get a medical professional, and we have a healthcare crisis right now, and seeing a doctor can be really difficult. As I mentioned earlier, Cal advisor capacity, and also different advisors make different accommodation plans. One advisor might say one thing, another advisor might make a different accommodation plan. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what you're getting into when you're getting into it. So those are just some possible barriers. And how can you advocate for yourself to reduce these barriers as much as possible? The biggest one I can give is ask to switch advisors if you feel like your advisor is not meeting your standards or not meeting your access needs. I have heard of many cases of students having not fantastic experiences with advisors and then being able to switch, but this is not something that the Cal advises or Cal advertises as much, but it is possible to switch advisors. You're not locked in for life once you get assigned an advisor. You can switch. And with that, you can also meet with Rowan, who's the associate director of the Cal. He's a fantastic person. Rowan is great. We love Rowan at the SSD. And he can discuss your accommodation plan with you in a more formal way. You can appeal it with him as well. And if these seem overwhelming and scary and inaccessible, reach out to the SSD and we will help you advocate. We are often in Cal meetings with staff and students. We sit in meetings with students wanting to change their accommodation plan, students wanting to meet with their Cal advisors. So we are able to help students advocate for their needs if they need. And it often goes quite well once we're able to get through that barrier. So with that, it's question discussion time. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or feelings or want to talk about their experiences? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for my short presentation on Cal accommodations. And I will turn off the recording now. Thank you.